Well, good afternoon. I am honored to be here this afternoon to once again pay tribute to Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. I've attended this event 10 years as a member of Congress, and now this is my 13th time as the mayor of the city to attend this event. And I do so because of his importance to our nation, because of his importance to our community, and because of his importance, I think, to our everyday lives. But rather than talk about Martin Luther King Jr. today, I want to talk about one of his colleagues for several moments. And I want to talk about one of his colleagues because I think at this time in our nation's history, it's important to recognize that the work that he did, which was incredibly important, was done not just by him, but he had allies. And I want to talk about one of his allies just for several moments right now. That ally I want to talk about is Congressman John Lewis. John Lewis was criticized over the weekend by President-elect Trump, who said that he was all words, 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 no action. I think it's important for all of us to take a step back and look at the history, because there's a lot in the news right now about fake news, and I deplore fake news, but I also deplore fake history. And that's why it's important for all of us to know who John Lewis is. In 1960, John Lewis became one of the original 13 freedom riders. There were 7 whites and 6 blacks who were determined to ride from Washington, D.C. to New Orleans in an integrated fashion. At that time, several states of the old Confederacy still enforced laws prohibiting black and white riders from sitting next to each other on public transportation. In 1963, John Lewis, one of the founding members of the SNCC, the Students Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, was elected chair to take over that organization. As chairman of the SNCC, Congressman Lewis was named one of the big 6 leaders who were organizing the March on Washington. And I think most of us, at least those of us who are older, know what that march was. That was an occasion of Dr. Martin Luther King's famous "I Have a Dream" speech. John Lewis was one of the 6 organizers, one of the big 6 that put that together. In fact, at 23, he was the youngest speaker that day, and is the last remaining living speaker. In 1964, Mr. Lewis coordinated the Mississippi Freedom Summer, a campaign to register black voters across the South. The Freedom Summer was an attempt to expose college students from around the country to the perils of African American life in the South. He traveled the country encouraging students to spend their summer break trying to help people in Mississippi, the most recalcitrant state in the Union, to register and vote. He became nationally known during his prominent role in the Selma to Montgomery marches, including his march across the famous Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma. As a member of Congress, I had the honor of traveling with him to Selma, and I had the honor to march across that bridge with Congressman Lewis, one of the greatest honors of my life. As you may know from the real history, at the end of that march across the bridge, Mr. Lewis and others were met by the Alabama state troopers who ordered them to disperse. When the marchers stopped to pray, the police discharged tear gas and mounted troopers charged the demonstrators, beating them with nightsticks. Mr. Lewis's skull was fractured, but he escaped across the bridge to Brown Chapel, the movement's headquarter church in Selma. Before he could be taken to the hospital, he appeared before the television cameras calling on President Johnson to intervene in Alabama. Mr. Lewis bears scars from the incident on his head that are still visible today. This is not fake history. This is real history. The First Lady, Michelle Obama, often says, when they go low, we go high. And I agree with that. We need to go high. We need to support Mr. Lewis. We needed this nation to know who he is and why he's so important to our history. I call on President-elect Trump to apologize to Mr. Lewis. That is the right thing to do. So as you can see, just the events in the last 48 hours tell us that our nation still has work to do. When the President-elect of the United States decides to use fake history, there's a problem. And it is our job as citizens, the position that President Obama just last week in Chicago called the most important position in our democracy. Again, the position of citizen, the most important position in our democracy. That we as citizens never allow the real history to be replaced by fake history. That is our charge today. That is a charge that I am confident Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. would embrace, and I ask you to do what you can in his memory and in honor of John Lewis. Thank you very much.